All right. Well, this is a first, I guess, for me. So we'll see how it goes. This is for a class at K-State, Research in Health Sciences, and so some of the students wanted some controversial topics in health science, and so wanted to get into kind of the insulin hormone model versus CICO energy balance model, and choosing Dr. Fung. And this is, the purpose of this is to address misunderstandings or misconceptions, at least on my part, and I'm happy to have discussions about this to better understand it. I think we can all work to better understand things, and so I respect Dr. Fung for his expertise, clinical expertise, and whatnot. But so without further ado, let's review it.
Hi, this week we're going to talk about the difference between how the hormonal theory, sometimes called the insulin model, differs from the calories model, and why that's really so important to understand when you're trying to lose weight, because it's more than just about calories. It's all about the hormones as well as the calories, and it's coming right up.
So I'll cut right there since he's cutting right there. So one of the things is that some people don't think that the calorie model takes into account hormones. Just from my perspective, I do postprandial metabolism studies, and we measure that, and so they're eating calories, and you get a change. So the energy balance model, the CICO model, takes into account hormone changes. I mean, that's what the energy that's taken in does. You get in a negative energy state, those hormones decrease. You get into a positive energy state, those hormones tend to increase. And so just a little clarification there.
In the traditional model of weight loss, we're really only concerned about calories. And this model says that food, in terms of its fattening effect, really is all down to the energy that it contains, which is what calories are. It's the amount of food energy that's contained.
So I'll add right here too, at least from my perspective as an energy balance, metabolic, nutrition, exercise phys, whatever you want to label me as. Scientist, I view food more than just energy and calories, because the micronutrient content and the essential nutrients can affect intake, and so you have to take those into account.
Contained within the food, and it's determined by burning it in something called a calorimeter. And the American Heart Association, in its scientific statement for 2021, which just came out about a few weeks ago, said this exact thing. So in their scientific statement, they said, number one, adjust energy intake and expenditure to achieve and maintain a healthy body weight, which means that the only thing that they feel is really important is the energy that is contained within the food. So if you adjust...
Again, I think it's overlooking the outcomes of adjusting, energy intake and expenditure. For example, very fit individuals tend to have a lower insulin response to the same glucose challenges as less fit individuals, and so the energy expenditure part can affect insulin sensitivity to the point of changing the hormones even when the same energy intake is consumed.
Adjust the energy intake and expenditure, then you're going to do fine. Nothing to do with the hormones. The hormonal model takes a different sort of approach. That is to say, food contains not just energy, which is calories, but also information as to what to do with those calories. That is, different foods are going to elicit different hormonal responses, and when they do, our body does different things. So our body can burn those calories, for example, it can store it as body fat, and which one it does is determined by the hormonal mix of those foods. And this model, sometimes called the carbohydrate insulin model, is promoted by Harvard scientists such as Dr. Walter Willett, Dr. David Ludwig, and other luminaries, which is in this paper from 2021. And the main hormone that they talk about is insulin, although there are smaller hormones that also contribute, such as cortisol. But the main hormone is insulin. And what we know about insulin is that when you eat, particularly carbohydrates, but also proteins, the hormone insulin is going to go up. So this is called a nutrient sensor. It tells the body that nutrients are coming in. When it does, it's going to stop the breakdown, so this is called a nutrient sensor. It tells the body that nutrients are coming.
Now, the interesting thing there is the nutrients relative to insulin that lead to an increase are energy containing, calorie containing. And so you can get a response in the anticipation of eating energy containing foods, but he says nutrients, but it's macronutrients typically that are involved with the change in insulin.
When it does, it's going to stop the breakdown of glycogen, which is a form of stored calories, and body fat, which is also a form of stored calories. And it's going to increase the synthesis. In essence, insulin is telling the body to store those calories, either as sugar, glycogen, or body fat. And it stops the breakdown. So the energy
So one of the issues is, I'm going to talk about this again later, but how much? So here, insulin stops the breakdown of glycogen and body fat. Does that mean any amount of insulin stops? No, it's a dose response. And so it's like a dimmer switch. It's not an on-off switch. And so using the term stops is, I think, a little oversimplification of the process that how insulin and just the endocrine system works in general. It's so I think using a dimmer switch, so it decreases in proportion to the concentration of that hormone, in this case insulin.
Balance equation is usually written as this: body fat equals calories in minus calories out. And this is always true, and nobody's denying that. However, there's really no such thing as a caloric deficit. Remember, this is a balance equation, which means that there are three variables here which must balance. There's body fat.
See, this is a big issue that I have, and when I started teaching energy balance here at K-State several years ago, about 15 to 20 years ago, I can't remember when I first taught it, but I had this same. I have a problem with the term balance too, and a lot of people in the literature will use like negative energy balance, and like, no, it's not balanced. My preference is to use the term negative energy state, or positive energy state, or a balanced energy state, or energy balance. And so it's positive, negative, or equal. And so you can change, and he's going to get into decreased body weight, and that's one of the things that, and like he says, it happens with everything. And so you see changes with low carbohydrate, low glycemic index. If people lose weight, their resting metabolic rate goes down because they don't need the energy to do the same amount of work to resist gravity, for breathing, for walking, etc. It's less work than it was before.
Fat, calories in and calories out. What it doesn't mean is that if you simply adjust one of those variables, you can determine which of the other variables is adjusted. Usually people say, well, if you simply eat less, that is, reduce the calories in, then it's going to be balanced by lower body fat. And your metabolic rate, which is calories out, is going to be unchanged because those are your three variables. Decrease calories in, decrease body fat, calories out stays the same. And they usually count you in terms of the first law of thermodynamics, which makes it sound very sciencey. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply here because there's a second alternative to what happens if you eat fewer calories. Looking at this equation, you can see that if you lower the calories in, you can just as easily balance this equation by lowering calories out. That is, your metabolic rate, the number of calories you burn in a day, may well be decreased and your body fat is unchanged.
So there's a couple things here. So one of the things too is energy balance affects weight. And one of the papers he's going to talk about soon is they talk about this in the paper, and looking at it from the standpoint of typically you do lose fat-free mass or lean body mass, whatever, and fat mass. And so it's to say it's just body fat is, I think, a misnomer and a miscalculation. Energy balance and just decreased, basically carbon-containing foods that have energy attached to them. It's going to lead to weight loss. You're going to have this happen, and you reach an equilibrium. And because you don't, from a thermodynamics perspective, you don't need as much energy going in. And so law of conservation of energy is if you have less energy going in, you're going to use stored energy to do the work that you need to do. But depending on how much you decrease that energy intake by or increase expenditure, you will reach a steady state at some point, unless you're really, really low. And that's where kind of bariatric surgeries come in, as far as really cutting down and restricting the ability to ingest energy-containing foods.
And this does not break the first law of thermodynamics, which is usually thrown out there as proof that eating less causes lower body fat. In fact, there is no such equation that says that. There are three variables. So reducing calories in can either reduce body fat or reduce metabolic rate. Both are equally. And which one happens? Well, let's look at the studies. In 1944, Dr. Ansel Keys did a study called The Biology of Human Starvation, where he was looking at what happens to the body when you reduce calories. And this was because it was the war and they were worried about what happened after the war when people didn't have enough to eat. So he took a number of volunteers and he gave them a low-calorie diet. So it wasn't starvation. In fact, he gave them 1,570 calories per day, which was a 40% reduction from their typical, and mostly very starchy, low-protein, low-fat foods typical of post-war Europe. So interestingly, this is almost exactly the diet that most weight loss professionals tell you to do. 1,500 calories a day, low fat, low protein. Therefore, low calories.
I'm not sure I know of low protein being recommended. I think there needs to be at least 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. So low protein, I think, is a oversimplification of kind of what happens. It may be less than what they were eating before. If it's 40% of the calories, so that's 28-ish hundred. And so if you decrease calories, you're going to decrease protein probably. It's hard to not decrease protein when you're decreasing just total food intake.
And what he did was he measured their metabolic rate before and after. And when you reduce the number of calories in by 40%, he found that their metabolic rate also decreased by 40%. Their heart volume shrank by 20%, their heart rate slowed, and their body temperatures dropped, in amongst a number of other things. And this has been a consistent finding for the last 70, 80 years. When you decrease your calories in, your calories out also decreases. Virtually all of the studies show a decrease in the metabolic rate by about 10 to 25%. Their conclusion was this. The first statement.
So in this study, what they also showed was that people typically lost, when they did this energy restriction, 75% of the weight was fat and 25% of the weight was lean body mass. And that could be water, protein, muscle, whatever. So you got to be careful when you hear lean. It's not necessarily muscle mass, but potentially body water, or likely body water for some extent. But fat loss happened. And then basal metabolic rate decreased because they didn't have to do as much work. Stair climbing is easier if you're not carrying around as much weight, because just the overall issues of gravity and gravitational forces are reduced. That includes, energy cost of breathing, etc.
Which can be made with some certainty is that a decrease in energy expenditure is a universal response to energy restriction. That is, if you eat fewer calories, it is a universal response. That is, we see it in virtually every single person that they will burn fewer calories.
Thermodynamics.
So, this is a representation. Suppose you have these three variables: energy coming in, which is calories. And I've depicted it here like coal. For example, in a coal burning power plant. You can have coal coming in, you can burn the coal, or you can store it in a warehouse. Our body has the same thing. You take energy in the form of calories, and you can store it in the form of sugar and body fat. So in sugar, you produce glycogen, which is glycogen synthesis, or you can produce body fat, which is called de novo lipogenesis.
Which is
when
very
you burn
small
that
percent.
Energy, that's mostly for metabolism, and exercise is a much smaller part.
Decrease fat oxidation versus
the most important thing to see here is that when you eat, the
lipogenesis.
insulin level goes up. So when that happens, you can either store those calories or you can burn it. And that's the only way it goes. You cannot take the body fat and use it for energy, because insulin inhibits lipolysis. Your body has those instructions to store energy, not burn it. So it can't take the energy out of the warehouse, which is the body fat, and use it for metabolism. So when insulin is high, the hormones are going to determine which way these arrows go. It's only when your insulin levels fall, such as with fasting, that you can now take the energy, the body fat, and use it for energy. So let's see what this means in the real world. Suppose people are eating 2,000 calories a day and burning 2,000 calories a day. So body weight is going to be stable. Now you want to lose some weight. So what you do is you follow the standard advice and you reduce.
So, one of the issues here, eating constantly, insulin levels high. 2,000 calories is not eating constantly. If you want to think of it as 2 small meals at a restaurant of 1,000 calories, and then there's a fast of about 12 hours in between each of those. So to use that fasting model, and I just put this together, from the 1,500 calories, how does one constantly eat on a 1,500 calorie diet, eating the foods that are deemed inappropriate? Cheeseburger, so I just use cheeseburgers. So if it's the guy from Popeye, so be it. So a 500 calorie cheeseburger, which is a smaller cheeseburger from the local stores. So it's not a pub, sports bar type cheeseburger that it may be 900 to 1,200 calories. A half pound to whatever, double, etc., with fries, those types of things. This is just a cheeseburger, 500 calories. If you have that for breakfast at 7 o'clock, noon for lunch, 6 o'clock, 6 p.m., or 1800 hours, have it again, then you're going to fast for 13 other hours. And so you have fasting going on here, 5 and 6 hours. And the data for insulin remaining elevated with this eating pattern and kcal intake, I've not seen it. And so here's a study that looked at hamburger and soda. So if you take out the soda and you substitute water, you're going to be about, depending upon how much soda one drinks, closer. But even with 820 calories, if you do that 3 times, so it's not 500, technically with this limit of 1,500 calories, you can only have 2 of those meals, and not even. So you're going to have 1 soda and then 1 water. They had a salmon meal. At 3 hours, insulin was almost back to normal. If you go out even further, most people are 4 hours from a postprandial state. And so that's with more calories than the 500. So the 500 calories is going to be more representative of here, and it's going to get probably lower than the salmon meal at 3 hours. And then you wait. And so in this case, you're going to wait 12 hours before you have another one of these meals. So what do you think is going to happen in that 12 hours? You're going to use body fat, use the calories, use the energy that was stored, because you're going to have glucagon, lower insulin, increase glucagon to drive lipolysis.
Standard advice, and you reduce the daily food intake to 1,500 calories a day. But you're eating constantly, you're eating very high carbohydrate food, so insulin levels stay high.
And so why do they have to be carbohydrate foods? Just a question. I mean, a hamburger, that's not necessarily high carbohydrate. It's higher calorie, but 820 calories. You get that from eggs and low carb and those types of diets too.
This is not balanced. You have 1,500 calories coming in, your metabolic rate is 2,000. What you try to do is you try to take those extra 500 calories from body fat, but you can't, because the high insulin is going to block that.
Yeah, high insulin. This is not high insulin. So it's not going to block it, in my professional opinion.
So because it's not balanced, what's going to happen is that the only way you can possibly balance it is that the metabolic rate has now got to fall to 1,500 calories. In other words,
it doesn't have to fall. You can exercise. You can walk 2 miles, with miles being about 100 calories per mile per day, and make up a difference and to extend the calorie deficit, the negative energy state, for longer. Your basal metabolic rate is going to decrease, but you can compensate for that with physical activity and being a little more active.
You're decreasing the number of calories out, your body fat stores are unchanged. Let's look at a different example where you have the same number of calories, but a different hormonal profile. Here you're going to have periodic fasting, where you're going to allow that insulin levels to fall, which is going to allow you access to the storage that's in the body fat. So same 2,000 calories in, 2,000 calories out. You reduce your calories to 1,500, but you also reduce how often you eat so that your insulin levels fall. Your body wants 2,000 calories. You've only got 1,500 coming in, but now, because your insulin levels are low, you can actually release.
So here's a great example. Have a hamburger and soda twice a day. Or pancakes. You can do pancakes in the morning. I guess I don't want to mention any brands. But you can do pancakes in the morning and hamburger and soda in the afternoon. Obviously, you need to get, if it's 1,500, you got to shift these a little bit, but this is what he's talking about, is what can be done here. And you get lower insulin throughout the day.
Release those extra 500 calories, and therefore you can keep
I'm
running
not saying
at
that this is what
2,000
somebody
and
should
your
do.
body fat levels are going to go down. So this is the hormonal model, which is that food really contains two very important factors. One is the energy, which is the calories, but equally important is the information that is carried in the foods as to what to do with that energy. Both of those are very important. If you only eat once a day, but you eat way too much, well, that's not going to be great for weight loss. But if you eat fewer calories, but eat all the time and block your access to the body fat stores, that's also going to be not.
So that's an issue too, because if eating all the time, if those eating opportunities are a couple hundred calories, and maybe it's beef jerky, it's not going to be that much. And so there's some misconceptions here that you can't achieve this without intermittent fasting, and data are coming out that kind of support that too, that there are multiple ways to get to changes in body composition, and low carb is a way to do it. Intermittent fasting is a way to do it. But so is snacking, grazing, small things, and eating, counting calories if somebody wants to do that works. So anyway, there's several ways to do it. Dietary guidelines, following those is a way to do it as well. Most people that gets a bad rap, but most people don't follow it. So when people say we've had the dietary guidelines for whatever, it's one of the issues is getting people to follow it has been problematic.
Not as successful.
As well as being physically active.
Those are the two models, the caloric
to the recommended
model
guideline
and the hormonal model. And you can see that they don't actually say anything different. But the hormonal model is a much more comprehensive understanding of how our body processes those calories, because it takes into account the amount of energy and the instructions of that energy. The calorie model, which just says just count your calories, actually takes no account of the instructions that are given to our body, and that's why it's been so unsuccessful for the last.
No, so if you look at the ADA, Weight Watchers, etc., you get points. So there is a dose, and they're taking that into account, and trying to have a known insulin response. And so if somebody does have diabetes, for example, they can know how much insulin to potentially provide to account for the carbohydrate and amino acid energy that's coming in, compounds that are coming in.
Last 50, 80 years, we've known that simply counting your calories and cutting them is not a successful way of losing weight.
So on that note, yeah, it can be, but B, if counting calories is difficult, it's you change your menu and you have restrictions, and so you say I'm not going to eat this. This is not on my menu, and you just say no, and people can banter about whether somebody should do that and what the health outcomes of those types of limitations are that people may put on themselves. But so if counting calories isn't successful, you can change your menu. Dean Ornish, if body weight change is what's desired, the Ornish diet works. Chris Gardner has had great studies, several, and it kind of doesn't matter which dietary pattern somebody follows. You can lose weight on any of those. So whether it's kind of a Weight Watchers Learn type diet or Atkins to Ornish, low fat. So anyway, we'll finish this out.
If you want to lose weight, you also have to let your insulin levels fall. And the best way for that, you can use intermittent fasting. You can also use low carbohydrate diets. I hope you've learned something today. If you did, please share it with somebody. And if you're interested.
Yep. So I'm sharing this with you all. It's one of those things where there's multiple ways to do it. That's kind of where I have issues with those that promote just the insulin model, and the hormone model, with insulin being the primary kind of hormone that gets discussed. So anyway, hey, if there's comments, questions, and corrections on my part or his part, put them down below, put them in the comments, and we'll address them. Have a great rest of your January, and I hope you're having a good start to your year. Thank you.